Good morning, Abundant Life Church. This is Pastor Chris, and today we're going to be looking at Romans chapter 3, verses 9 down through 20. I remember a few years ago hearing a comedian talking about being in New York. He wasn't from there, and he said the city's kind of hard to experience, but he found the key. He said, all you have to do is act angry all the time. So I just go everywhere and be angry. He said, I made more friends that way. It's kind of their default setting. And yet, if you remember after 9/11, there were so many acts of kindness among the people of New York. Simple decency, sharing and helping and encouraging on the rescue workers, the firefighters. People volunteered at triage centers. They bought food to rescue workers. They cheered them on. So the question is this: are New Yorkers good people who can be rude, or are they rude people who can be good? This is kind of like the old question. Is a zebra black with white stripes, or is it white with black stripes? Or is it neither? Now, actually, I've been to Africa, I've seen zebras, I've talked about zebras before, and I know there's an answer to this, I just can't remember what it is. Google it, look it up. Here's the thing I want to talk about, though. It's that zebras black with white stripes or white with black stripes idea. Are people essentially good and sometimes we're evil, or are we essentially evil and sometimes we're good? Are we good and sometimes we do bad things, or are we bad, sometimes we do good things, or a little of both, or is it neither? Are you even comfortable having us painted with a large brush like that? In this passage, Paul says there's nobody, no one who cares about God. He says we're all pretty rotten and we're all against the things of faith. He makes it sound like the entire human race is just a bunch of atheists who don't care about God. You know, yeah, we may not be perfect, but are we really that bad? Don't we have some inherent goodness in us? Again, let's phrase the question. Are we good people who sometimes do bad things, or are we bad people who sometimes do good things, or are we both, or are we neither, or doesn't it matter? Paul says all of us are pretty horrible. Are we really? He says no one cares about following God, but how can he say that? Lots of people love God. Now, he starts out here by saying that both Jews and Gentiles are in the same boat, and then he uses scripture to back this up. Let's start there in verse 9. Verse 9 says, what shall we conclude then? Do we have any advantage? And he's talking about his fellow Jews. Do we have any advantage? Not at all. For we have already made the charge that, for we have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under the power of sin. A few verses before this, Paul had talked about the advantage to being a Jew. They grew up with the things of God. All right, now that is an advantage, just like growing up in a Christian home. But he's saying here, be careful. It doesn't mean that you're saved because you're Jews. You don't have a salvation advantage. Being Jews doesn't mean that you're automatically getting to heaven. And he says, frankly, you're just as doomed as everybody else. Now look at verses 10 through 18. As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There's no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Right? He's using a quote from Scripture here, and he's being pretty clear. Nobody's any good. Everybody's turned from God. Now, the Jews were asking, hey, are we saved just because we're Jews? Well, yeah, your people have a long history of going off course. And everybody who isn't a Jew, you're kind of in the same boat as well, because you haven't followed God. He's saying here we're all just a bunch of selfish, godless sinners and hypocrites. He says nobody even tries to follow God. We can't be that bad, can we? Aren't there some people who genuinely do love the Lord? Because Paul makes it here sound like every single human being is wicked. Every single human being is just wallowing in sin. Every single human being hates the things of God. But what about the goodness and the kindness that we've seen in people? Not everyone turns away from God, do they? I want to tell you about a little old lady who used to teach Sunday school. Now, she's years ago gone to be with the Lord. But Norma Teft used to teach, I think it was the 3 and 4-year-old Sunday school class every Sunday. She was down in the church basement, faithfully teaching. This was in northern Idaho. Now, she wasn't the regular teacher there. She was a substitute teacher. The lady who usually taught that class, Velma, was going to have a baby, and she asked Norma if she would sub for her. And Norma did. She substitute taught that class from 1944 until 1997. Think about that. For almost half a century, she taught Sunday school. And she had both of my boys in her Sunday school class. They loved her teacher. They loved their teacher, excuse me. And she would, every Mother's Day, she would march them down to her house, which is only about 2 blocks from the church. And they would pick flowers out of their garden for Mother's Day. On the day that she finally retired, we had a big celebration for her. And they had all the students that were there in the church that had her sat up in the choir loft. And there was my son Jordan, who was in her class. I think he was 4 years old at the time. And he's sitting next to John Teft, Norma's son, who was in his 50s. Yeah, that's a pretty good ministry. She would have kept on teaching, but she was so deaf by this time she couldn't hear the kids, and the kids would say, "Teacher, I have to go potty," and she would smile and pat them on the head and nod at them because she couldn't hear what they were saying. But she had such a heart. You're going to tell me that Norma's a bad person? Is that what Paul was saying here? Are all of us really that bad? And if we're all that bad, even the Norma Tafts, do we stand any chance at all? Aren't some of us worth saving? How does this work? Well, to find out, tune in next time. Till then, have a great day.